Ben Simmons went from being called the next LeBron to contemplating retirement while being in the middle of his prime. At the moment, he's still not currently signed to a team and might be calling it quits after just 7 years. Instead of carrying the torch that people were trying to give him, his career has quickly declined further and further every year for multiple different reasons. Ben was the #1 pick, the Rookie of the Year, a 3-time All-Star, and a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, yet less than 5 years later, he's struggling to find a team. He even parted ways with his agent Bernie Lee, which wouldn't even be the first time because he also parted ways with Clutch Sports just a few years ago. So is this the end for Ben Simmons? Well, let's talk about it. At this point in his career, he's far from what he used to be. I mean, he's almost missed as many games as he's played. Since getting drafted, he's played 383 games. He's also missed 336 games. However, he's still made like $200 million over his career off contracts alone and doesn't have to step onto a basketball court again for the rest of his life. In 7 years, he's played for 3 different teams, and his numbers and athleticism has greatly declined basically every season. During his last stint with the Clippers, he literally fell out of the rotation in the playoffs entirely, which is absolutely crazy knowing how good he was those first few years. He was being called the next LeBron or Magic Johnson. He was easily one of the most hyped prospects we've seen. Ben was great in high school and just as good at LSU. But I also feel like it's where you started to see some of those red flags that would pop back up in the later parts of his career. He averaged almost 20, 10, and 5 and had some pretty wild games. He was considered the best player in the country and won basically every award because of it, except for the Wooden Award, which goes to the best player in college basketball. Not because he wasn't good enough, but because he didn't have at least a 2.0 GPA. He made it very public that he wasn't there for school multiple different times, and it was kind of all swept under the rug because back then athletes weren't being paid. It wasn't just that though. Since LSU didn't make the cut for the March Madness tournament, they were instead invited to the NIT tournament. But Ben Simmons literally told them that if they accept the invite, then he would opt out and not play. So LSU decided to just decline the invite and wrap up their somewhat chaotic season so they can focus on next year instead. Ben knew he was going to be the first overall pick no matter what, and that's exactly what happened in the 2016 draft. Although there were a lot of people and analysts that were questioning his attitude and love for the game during that time. And since he had a foot injury that would keep him out his first year in the league, he wouldn't make his debut until 2017. But the criticism about him was quickly forgotten because his first few seasons were really good. His passing looked great, he was always solid on defense, and was extremely athletic. His ability to play above the rim was one of the key parts of his game that you started to see less and less over the course of his career. He definitely had aspects of his game that he needed to work on, but he was still in his early 20s with a ton of time to improve. He played almost every game those first 2 years, and while he dealt with some minor injuries, it wasn't until 2020 when we really started to hear about his back problems. I know a lot of people believe that his decline was only because of his mentality and that the back injury stuff didn't really play a part. But he did have 2 pretty big documented back surgeries in the span of 2 years. One to address a herniated disc and the other to alleviate nerve damage. There are regular people that struggle living their lives after a herniated disc, let alone a dude that's 6'10 and utilizes his athleticism a good bit. At the same time though, it's also pretty obvious that his decline is not only because of his back injury either, although I do think it played a bigger part than a lot of people realize. In February 2020, in a game against the Bucks, he had a pretty rough fall in his back, which led to him laying in the locker room throwing up in pain. Apparently, it was really bad and made everything worse to the point where he's still dealing with nerve issues in his back ever since. He returned for a few games after the season resumed months later, but it didn't last long before the Sixers kept him out for the rest of the year. The reason that not a lot of people even knew about it was because it happened right before the pandemic. So obviously everyone was much more focused on that than what was happening with Ben Simmons. After a decent break, he was able to return and play in the 2021 season, and he was also signed to an absolutely massive 5-year contract by the Sixers. He put up really good numbers that year, but you could tell he was starting to play a bit different. His numbers slightly dropped, and although it wasn't by much, watching him told you everything. He started to become a lot less aggressive, and you weren't really seeing the improvements that you were hoping to see by then. There were some games where he seemed completely fine, but then there were others where he just seemed off. And it all became extremely evident in the playoffs later that season. After a good series against the Wizards in the first round, they took on the Atlanta Hawks. and although he was decent for the first few games, there was clearly something happening in the last 3. He took 14 total shots combined, and after shooting 4 for 14 from the free throw line in Game 5, it didn't seem like he wanted to go there either. That's ultimately what led to that moment in Game 7 where he passed up a wide open dunk when Trae Young was the only person even close to him. That was not the first time that happened, and it would continue to happen years later. It seemed like he lost all confidence in himself and was trying to change his game because of it. That moment was a massive turning point. The media and fans were already starting to criticize how he played that season, but that moment in the biggest game of the year was the cherry on top. But that's not even close to the end of it. In the following season, not long after the Sixers paid him, he wanted to be traded. He felt like he didn't fit the team, and the Sixers didn't really deny it. Ben justified holding out and missing games by saying that he was recovering from his back injury, which is why people to this day believe the entire injury thing was exaggerated. He did return to practice at the beginning of that year, but was thrown out by Doc Rivers because he wouldn't substitute in a drill and was suspended for their season opener. He didn't show up in the preseason at all and said it was because of his mental health as well. Even if he was right, the way he was going about it was terrible, and for a lot of people, he was getting treated like the boy who cried wolf. Ben got fined so much for sitting out that he literally became the most fined player in NBA history. He would end up getting his way when he was traded to the Nets, but things only seemed to get worse. Over his 2.5-year tenure with Brooklyn, he had career lows in every category. There were some good games and moments where he looked like the old Ben Simmons, but he just didn't have the same tendencies. He also viewed himself as a star, yet played like a role player that didn't even want to be there half the time. Over the years, he just seemed mentally checked out, on top of possibly not caring about the game as much as you'd expect. The back pain could have caused him to not want to stay in the gym and expand his game or even be on the court at all. And the whole situation was made so much worse because of the massive amount of money he was being paid during this time. He eventually signed a 1-year deal with the Clippers, and while again there were some good moments, he still looked like a shell of himself. Ben did start to actually buy into a specific role, but he just wasn't the same player. And it didn't last long before he completely lost his spot in the rotation during the playoffs. Now that leads us to today, where it's almost halfway through September and he still hasn't been picked up by a team. Instead of having career years in his prime, he's basically out of the league. Of course, there still is a chance he gets picked up, but I don't see it being for more than anything than the minimum, and playing time definitely won't be guaranteed. There was a report going around that the Knicks offered him a contract and he declined it, only for another report to come out the very next day saying that they never offered him at all and that his agent dropped him because Ben wasn't interested. As good of a player as he was, it feels like those days are long gone. Whether it was the injuries or his lack of love for the game, or both, I don't see him going back to what he used to be. He could try to buy into another role like he briefly did with the Clippers, but he's still got a long way to go. And at this point, he's already made a couple $100 million, so I don't think he's too mad either way. But let me know what you think about Ben Simmons in the comments, and please leave a like to support the channel. Also, subscribe if you're new for more basketball videos just like this one.